Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Charles Ellinas, CEO of Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company. There's no doubt a lot going on in the East Med, and Cyprus right at the center of it in terms of the East Med energy development that's been now, I suppose, close to 10 years underway. Time flies. But Dr. Charles, perhaps we could just kick off with a slightly bigger picture situation. It's now the beginning of May 2021, the year of recovery in some ways from COVID. How has the pandemic impacted the energy development of the East Med and generally the industry in Cyprus as we now emerge, hopefully, from the COVID pandemic?
Well, it brought everything to a standstill. I mean, everybody was expecting drilling to continue, exploration to continue, but everything has been brought to a standstill. For one reason, obviously, COVID-19 had an impact on the ability of the oil companies to operate under those circumstances. But also, as you know, last year we had the massive problems with Turkey. Turkey's, how to describe it, I mean, aggressive approach to the whole of the region in terms of maritime disputes, drilling in Cyprus waters. All of these factors brought all activities to a standstill last year. And
I mean, this has been a challenge for the last decade, I would say, that we've seen. I used to joke a little bit, although it's not very funny, but nonetheless, we are based in the Gulf. And of course, the Gulf is historically famous for having all sorts of geopolitical tensions. But yet the East Med seems to be littered with complicated fault lines between Cyprus and Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Israel, and Lebanon. There's no shortage of fractures there. The economic exclusion zones seem to be a constant hurdle. What is the outlook, do you think, for overcoming all of those?
As you described, it is very complicated. So the only country in the region that seems to be reasonably unaffected and continuing with these programs is Egypt. Activities in Egypt have recovered, they're continuing. It has a huge internal market for gas, and it's quite profitable. There is a huge industry there, so everything in Egypt seems to be progressing. Around Cyprus, obviously, it depends greatly on the situation with the oil companies first. I mean, most of the discoveries are in the south of the island, in areas not quite disputed by Turkey. So in theory, without the problems the oil companies had and the change in the global markets and prices, exploration in the East Med could have continued. But as you know, last year, the oil companies had a particularly difficult year with huge losses, huge write-offs. And since then, the outlook for the industry has changed completely. This huge pressure towards renewables and clean energy is changing the global industry massively. So around Cyprus, nothing much is happening. Lebanon and Israel are, again, they seem to be on the way to go back into discussions. But Lebanon has complicated things by, in effect, enlarging its demands, the areas it disputes. It now says that the Karish and Tanin gas fields that are in the Israeli EZ and they are being operated by Energean fall into the disputed zone. So that complicates things tremendously. Instead of actually towards some kind of a solution, it complicates things.
But we also have in that complication. We also have Qatar investing in some of the Cyprus projects, QP, the UAE, Mubadala now looking to invest into the Israeli zone.
In the Tamar, yes. But where things have quietened significantly is between Greece and Turkey. So I think President Erdogan, having seen the changes in the United States, the new president and the new administration, has realized that confrontation, it's not going to work out. So he has been this year, end of last year, change approach to the problems, try to be conciliatory. In fact, yesterday or the day before, as you know, Turkey sent a delegation to Egypt to try and resume some kind of relationship, and they're making overtures to Israel. And the disputes with Greece have been put on ice for the time being, and discussions are taking place. And the European Union...
There was some expectation over the decade of the development of East Med energy that Cyprus could be the center of that as a conduit for LNG and for other things because of its membership with the European Union, that you would be a political zone of stability. It doesn't seem to be working out that way. Is Cyprus not getting the appropriate support it needs from the European Union?
I don't think it's support from the European Union that is the problem. The Cyprus, as you pointed out, had actually the opportunity 10 years ago or thereabouts to become the center. You referred to earlier on when we had a chat about developments in Cyprus in 2012, 2013. At that time, there were plans to build an LNG plant. Things were progressing quite extensively. But unfortunately, the political situation in Cyprus wasn't conducive. The politicians in Cyprus were not ready. I mean, Cyprus didn't fully understand at the time the opportunities. So they squandered the opportunities that were there in 2012. And since then, these haven't come back. It's not a case of support by the European Union. It's a case of seizing opportunities, which were lost. Now, as you know, Egypt is advancing its own claim to become the hub of the region, and I believe that is now going to happen. You know that Israel has made up its mind that if it is to export any of its gas, which by the way, I don't believe is going to be easy, it's going to do it through the Egyptian LNG plants. So they're talking about more pipelines to Egypt, exports from Egypt. Egypt has a policy to become the hub of the region, and Cyprus is at a standstill. So Cyprus, I think, lost the opportunity for these reasons. The fact that nothing is happening now is not helping.
I mean, ultimately, once you have a fracture of such geopolitical scale on your island between the north being occupied by Turkey and that division, what is the outlook? There seems to be once again some rumors, murmurs that there would be an opportunity for reunification. Is that still viable? Could that be the pathway to a stable energy development in that region?
So last week there were resumed discussions about the Cyprus problem in Geneva. Unfortunately, the outcome was nothing came out of it. There was no agreement, and the UN Secretary General decided to postpone or to reconvene another meeting in 3 months' time. The outlook for a solution doesn't seem to be very strong. The differences between the two sides continue, and if a solution comes out, it will come out because Europe and the United States together engineer something out of this situation. Otherwise, the two communities are far apart at the moment. They are not anywhere near resolving their problems. The situation in terms of energy in Cyprus is also not just these political problems, but the global market and commercial situation. I mean, the global markets have moved away. Gas is no longer at the center of the world.
It seems to be gas is getting caught in the debate of the energy transition. There was an expectation that gas would be at the center, the sort of transition fuel to the low carbon economy, but it now seems there's a bit of a tug of war on getting gas, keeping gas on the agenda in Europe. What do you think needs to be done to ensure gas remains on the agenda as the transition fuel?
I think Europe is eventually, over the later this year, is going to accept that gas is part of that transition. As you know, they set up together what they call the taxonomy in Europe to decide what is sustainable, what is green energy. Gas was left out, nuclear was left out. The Eastern and Southeast Europe countries objected to that. And it looks as if gas will be reinstated as part of the transition, which I think is sensible. But it's not
given how much Europe depends on gas, it seems that it would be illogical anything else.
It will be logical, but it won't be back to where it was. Gas will be always under pressure at the receiving end, and Europe is taking measures to move away towards green energy. So all of the funding coming out of Europe for new projects is diverted to green energy.
Hydrogen's getting a lot of attention.
And hydrogen, yes. So in Europe, gas will be there during transition, but not the same way as before. So, for example, the EastMed has been hoping to be able to export gas to Europe. I don't believe it's going to happen. I believe the opportunity is gone. Europe doesn't need new imports of gas. Europe will find it gradually more difficult to use the resources it has. It imports gas from various countries that will continue. The United States is trying to increase the exports of LNG to Europe. So Europe doesn't need any new sources of gas. So that avenue for the EastMed has gone. If that is gone, then what does it leave? It leaves Asia and the Far East. But even there are now huge changes in the situation. Qatar, as you mentioned before, Qatar is investing massively now in expanding their own LNG capabilities. The Russian companies, Novatek, specifically in Russia, is quite successful in what it's doing, and everybody's diverting their gas exports towards Asia. Prices.
I mean, we have in this region some very big domestic markets that are hungry for gas. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran obviously has a lot of its own gas, but it does appear that it is a region that is hungry for gas. It's just the politics seem to be getting in the way of that economic opportunity.
Exactly. I mean, having just to complete the argument about the Far East has also become a difficult market for EastMed gas. It's challenging. So as you pointed out, what does it leave? It leaves the region, and there are countries in the region, and there are markets in the region which need to be exploited. Hopefully, the newly constituted EastMed Gas Forum will be instrumental in opening up these markets, but it's not easy. Even you mentioned Turkey as a big market. Turkey itself has changed its own policies, and it is now favoring anything produced domestically, including coal, including lignite, simply because it doesn't want to depend on others. So the needs of Turkey to import gas are diminishing. They have also brought FSRUs, and they are now able to buy LNG from the spot market. They have storage. All of these give them independence, and they're no longer a massive market for gas for the region. Egypt is potentially a market because their needs increase as well, but Egypt is also investing heavily in renewables. And right now, Egypt has excess electricity.
If you
future
consider
energy.
all of those factors and come back to the point that you made at the beginning, which is that in 2020, with the collapse of oil and gas prices and obviously the global economy, the major international energy companies made dramatic cutbacks in their capital expenditure for new exploration and development. How does that, combined with these market challenges, affect the outlook for East Med development?
It's difficult. I mean, the East Med gas is expensive to develop.
It's very deep water.
It's very deep water. There is no infrastructure in the region. For all of these reasons, it's expensive to develop. The majors are now diverting their investments in areas where they have bigger opportunities, bigger returns, easier to develop, no geopolitical problems. I mean, take, for example, ExxonMobil. We're expecting ExxonMobil to come back to Cyprus to continue drilling in Block 10. But right now, ExxonMobil has massive opportunities in Guyana, but also in North America. And last year, they had massive losses. This year, they're recovering some of their profits. But are they going to come back to the East Med and continue from where they left it? I doubt it. I think for the next year or two, they won't do that. They will be waiting and seeing how everything develops before they decide where to go next. So activity in the East Med is not going to continue, is not going to come back where it was before. Drilling in Lebanon will stop, will not happen. Lebanon itself has other massive problems. In Cyprus, there is opportunity still to export the Aphrodite gas to Egypt. But even that project is not straightforward because it's down to economics. By the time you produce the gas, you take it by pipeline to Egypt, you liquefy it and export it to the Far East. It's not possible to do it within the current prices. So who is going to do it? They're not going to do it for just because there is a project to be done. The oil companies now, if they invest in new projects, they invest in new projects with high returns. This is not one of those projects. So the region needs to change its own energy policies, energy strategy. The region as a whole needs to look at energy in a different way, and it has to be in the context of renewables, because renewables are coming up, they're there to stay, they're becoming cheaper. Gas can become a partner to renewables. There could be opportunities. Egypt is very successful in developing its petrochemical industry using gas. There are opportunities to do the same in other parts of the region. All of that needs to come together as a new approach to gas.
Well, I suppose that's where the response, ExxonMobil and all of the other majors will be looking to the East Med countries to sort out their own sort of alignment. And as you suggest, Israel moving gas, utilizing the LNG infrastructure that already exists in Egypt, Egypt hosting the East Med Forum. These are all steps, and we would think, in the right direction to create a sort of coordinated strategy by the countries in the East Med. As you said, Egypt is sort of emerging as that center. Does that make sense to Cyprus?
It does make sense to Cyprus as well. I think Cyprus has come around to the idea that Egypt is going to become the center. But it is always a question as to whether these developments are commercially viable. I do not believe that policies based on exporting the gas from the region to the world, to Far East, to Asia, to Europe, are valid any longer. I think those have now been superseded by developments. That's why I come back to this suggestion that the region needs to look at how to use this gas regionally. There are opportunities, but they need the governments of the region to seize these ideas, develop new policies, new approaches, open up the markets, and invite investors to come and do these developments. I mean, apart from everything else, take Lebanon. Lebanon is in trouble, but it needs gas. I don't believe the
Desperately.
oil companies will go back and continue drilling in Lebanon. I think that opportunity has gone. But gas from the region can't go to Lebanon. Gas in Cyprus could be used for petrochemicals, not necessarily just for export as LNG or as gas any longer. We need to think differently. We need to think.
Well, you would think that
regionally.
there is positive developments in that direction. In the recent months, we saw obviously Israel and the UAE sign a peace agreement with
Yes.
Bahrain, with Sudan. We've seen some real sort of old geopolitical fractures being healed. Does coming out of COVID, out of this very turbulent period, does it offer a new beginning, do you think, for the East Med?
I think it does. I think the countries of the region will come out poorer, in more difficulty. There is a resource which they can exploit, and they will be forced to look into it. I think, as I said before, the international oil companies are not going to continue investing in the region the same way as before. One thing we haven't discussed, just very briefly, there is still this view that gas from the region can be exported to Europe through the East Med gas pipeline. That is a pipe dream, not a pipeline. Once these ideas are put to rest,
right,
then the countries of the region have opportunities. The problem with the politicians of the region is that they are a little bit isolated from the rest of the world. They're living to a world of their own. They still hold on to these ideas that were developed 10 years ago of exports. We're still talking about exports. In Israel, the government there is still talking about finding ways to export this gas to Europe, which is not going to happen, or to the rest of the world as LNG, which is challenging. We need to move away
you
from
don't
that.
sound very confident, just to finish up on LNG from a global point of view.
No.
Are you less confident that LNG will be a solution for the future? There is huge demand centers in Asia.
There is, and I agree completely. LNG is going to be part of the future, not the same way as before. I mean, for a start, because of the increasing rivalry between the United States and China, China will cease to be a major importer of LNG from countries that it considers to be friendly to the United States. So the China is trying to become self-sufficient in terms of energy. As you have noticed, they are investing heavily still in coal. And they declare they're not going to stop investing in coal until after 2025, 2026. They're relying heavily on friendly countries like Russia. Russia now Gazprom is started a feasibility study to look into importing more gas into China. So the LNG trade in Asia is not going to be what it was expected to be 3-4 years ago. It's going to be there, definitely, but it won't grow in the same way. And there are too many suppliers ready to send their LNG to Asia. That keeps prices down.
And maybe not enough bankers willing to finance the expensive infrastructure. And as we emerge from COVID, some of these questions will have to start to find answers. But Dr. Charles Ellinas, CEO of Cyprus Natural Hydrocarbons Company, thank you very much for joining us on Halftime Talk this week. It's great to get an up-to-date insight on what's happening in the East Med.
Thank you too. It was nice talking to you, and let's hope that we can find a way forward in the future and make better use of our resources.
I'm sure time will deliver. Thank you, Doctor. A pleasure to meet you.